Welcome to the deep dive. You, our listener, sent in a truly mind-bending stack of philosophical explorations, and we've taken the plunge.
Yeah, really fascinating stuff.
We're aiming to bring you the most electrifying insights. Today's mission. It's all about grappling with whether a calculable model could ever possibly, lasso the entirety of the universe.
A small question then.
Just a tiny one. And you were especially keen on the wild frontiers of complexity and randomness. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, this is where the really juicy questions live, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right at the crossroads of, well, philosophy, physics, and pure math.
Definitely.
The sources you shared, they bravely venture into the abstract, asking about the fundamental limits of how we can even represent reality.
Especially if we're trying to do it with something, as concrete as a computable model.
Exactly. That computable part is key.
So one of the thought experiments that jumped out right away was this classic philosophical move. Let's just pretend for a moment that we do have a perfect calculable model.
Assume it exists.
Right. One that nails every single detail of physical reality.
Yeah.
The game then becomes trying to trip it up, to find the logical flaw, the contradiction.
The thing that shows it can't actually exist. Exactly. It's the logical equivalent of setting a trap.
The contradiction trap.
This proof by contradiction method. Yeah. It's all about assuming the opposite of what you want to show, and then following that assumption, down the rabbit hole until you hit something utterly absurd.
Something impossible.
Right. If you reach that point, your initial assumption has to crumble. It just can't hold.
And why is this particular head-scratcher, this question of whether we can have a complete and exact calculable blueprint of reality, why is it so darn important?
Well, it drills down to the very bedrock of our understanding, doesn't it? We're talking metaphysics, what is real, and epistemology, how can we possibly know what's real? If we could build a perfect, calculable model, it would paint a picture of a, well, fundamentally predictable universe.
Everything laid out, in principle.
But if we can't, it suggests there are built-in boundaries, maybe fundamental limits, to what we can ever grasp.
Okay, and the source material then throws out some truly heavyweight contenders for where this contradiction might lie.
Oh yeah, the big guns.
We're talking about the brain-bending worlds of Gödel's incompleteness theorems, Turing's halting problem, quantum mechanics.
Even the model describing itself. That's a fun one.
Right. Okay, let's try to make sense of these without needing, like, a PhD seminar. First up, Gödel's theorems. What's the core punchline there, in simple terms?
Think of it this way. Gödel's essentially showed that in any mathematical system complex enough to be interesting, let's say like arithmetic,
Yeah, okay.
there will always be true statements that the system itself just cannot prove.
So things that are true, but the rules inside the system can't demonstrate they're true.
Exactly. So if our calculable model of reality has to be a kind of formal system, could there be real aspects of the universe that are undeniably true, but forever just beyond the reach of the model's ability to prove them?
It suggests an inherent incompleteness, like a blind spot built into the model itself.
Precisely. A fundamental limitation.
Right, the model might always miss something. Next, Turing's halting problem. That sounds like something that keeps programmers awake at night.
It does, in a way.
Yeah.
Turing proved that you can't write a universal program, like a master checker, that can look at any other program and its input and tell you for sure, guaranteed, whether that program will eventually finish its job or just get stuck in a loop forever.
No crystal ball for computer programs.
Pretty much. So, if the universe's behavior, as our model describes it, somehow runs into these kind of undecidable problems, well, then the model wouldn't be able to predict its own future in every single scenario.
That's properly unsettling. Okay, and then there's quantum mechanics, the land of particles doing, well, weird things.
Weird and wonderful things, yeah. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics point to a fundamental randomness at the heart of reality.
Especially when we measure things, right?
Exactly, when we make measurements. If this randomness isn't just a mask for, say, hidden deterministic processes we don't know about.
If it's truly real randomness.
If it's truly baked into the fabric of the universe, then a calculable model, which usually relies on deterministic rules or maybe predictable probabilities, well, it might struggle to give a truly exact account of every single quantum event.
It can't predict the exact outcome if it's fundamentally random.
That's a potential issue, yeah.
And the last one, the model describing itself. That sounds like a logical not waiting to be tied, a paradox.
Precisely. If the calculable model is itself a part of the physical reality it's trying to describe,
Which it would have to be, eventually.
right, then it could get tangled up in logical paradoxes when it tries to predict its own future state or define its own properties completely. Think of the classic liar paradox. This statement is false.
If it's true, it's false. And if it's false, it's true. Ow.
Exactly. If the model includes a statement about its own accuracy or completeness, it could lead to similar kinds of self-referential contradictions.
Okay, shifting gears slightly. You, our listener, threw in a really intriguing idea.
This was interesting.
Could the fact that there are essentially no truly isolated systems in reality,
Yeah.
could that be the key to unlocking this contradiction? The notion that, well, everything is connected.
This is a deeply insightful observation, I think, and a very promising direction for this line of thought.
Yeah.
The intuition that complete isolation is basically an illusion in our universe. It aligns beautifully with our current understanding of physics, right? Gravity, light, electromagnetic fields, quantum entanglement.
Everything's connected somehow.
Yeah, all sorts of fields ensure that even seemingly distant systems are subtly intertwined, always interacting, even if just a tiny bit.
So how could this constant interconnectedness throw a wrench in the works of a calculable model that's aiming for an exact description of, well, anything?
Okay, the crux of the matter lies in that ambition of exact description and the nature of a calculable model.
Finite rules, finite computation.
Right. If nothing is truly isolated, then to perfectly describe any single piece of reality, our model would logically have to account for the endless web of influences and interactions, reaching it from, well, potentially every other corner of the universe.
All the way out.
This interconnectedness could become infinitely complex. It could demand literally an infinite amount of information and infinite computational muscle to capture with absolute precision.
But a calculable model is finite.
Exactly. A calculable model, by its very definition, operates with finite resources, finite algorithms. The contradiction could arise from this fundamental mismatch.
A mismatch between the potential infinitude of a truly interconnected reality and the inherent finiteness of any calculable model we could build.
Precisely. Think of it like trying to draw a perfect circle. In theory, it's simple, right? A geometric concept.
Yeah.
But in the messy reality of atoms and vibrations and imperfections, achieving a truly perfect physical circle is infinitely nuanced. Perhaps a truly exact model faces a similar infinite regress because of this universal interconnectedness.
It's like trying to perfectly predict a single snowflake falling in a blizzard, factoring in the precise impact of every other air molecule, every thermal eddy.
Exactly. It quickly spirals into an impossible task for any finite computer.
The complexity just explodes.
Yeah, the continuous exchange of information, quantum entanglement that can occur across vast distances. All this could push the informational and computational demands of an exact model way beyond what any calculable system could ever hope to manage.
Now, this leads us neatly into your attempt to pin down what complexity itself is. The initial thought was, complexity is simply something that isn't calculable.
That was the starting point.
But you immediately spotted a snag that definition throws complexity into the same bucket as pure randomness.
You've hit on a really critical point there. While it's true that purely random events aren't predictable by a deterministic algorithm shorter than the sequence itself.
Right, you just have to list the random outcomes.
Yeah. But it doesn't feel like the same kind of rich, structured intricacy we usually associate with complexity. Imagine flipping a coin repeatedly versus the astonishing architecture of a single living cell.
Very different kinds of unpredictable.
Exactly. Both might be unpredictable in their exact details, maybe, but they feel fundamentally different in terms of organization, structure, purpose, even.
So it seems the core challenge isn't just what we can't calculate.
But why we can't calculate it, and whether that why points to a deeper kind of organization or, well, something else entirely, like pure chance.
And the sources also reminded us that unpredictability doesn't automatically equal incalculability. We have these fascinating deterministic chaotic systems
Theory, yeah.
where the underlying rules are actually quite simple, maybe even calculable, but their long-term behavior becomes practically impossible to forecast.
Because of their extreme sensitivity to even the tiniest changes in their starting conditions. The butterfly effect idea.
Right. Think of weather patterns, for example. We have models, but perfect long-range prediction is, well,
Still elusive, to say the least. Precisely. So defining complexity solely as not calculable creates a problem.
it's too broad.
Yeah. It would lump in the featureless unpredictability of pure randomness with the highly structured unpredictability of something like a biological system.
And it might even exclude things we think are complex.
Exactly. It might exclude systems that we intuitively recognize as complex but happen to be governed by calculable rules, even if those rules lead to wildly unpredictable outcomes in practice.
Okay, so how do we even begin to disentangle the complexity that feels like, I don't know, order emerging from something,
Structured complexity.
from the apparent complexity of pure, unadulterated randomness? Just noise.
This is a central challenge in many fields, from information theory to physics to biology. One approach looks at compressibility, algorithmic complexity, Kolmogorov complexity.
How concisely can you describe the thing?
Basically, yeah. Random sequences are notoriously hard to compress. You essentially just have to write them out. Ordered structures, like repeating patterns, are very compressible.
And complex systems.
They often land somewhere in the middle. They have structure, but it's not simple repetition. Another angle focuses on identifying patterns and regularities, trying to quantify the amount of information needed to describe the predictable parts, filtering out both perfect order and pure noise. Statistical complexity or effective complexity does this.
Trying to find the signal in the noise.
Kind of. Then there are ideas centered on the generative process. Does the complexity arise from a small set of simple rules that interact in non-obvious ways? Cellular automata are a great example.
Simple rules, complex results.
And finally, we can think about different types of information, trying to distinguish between the random bits, the truly unpredictable stuff, and the bits that encode meaningful structure or correlations.
Okay, lots of ways to slice it. So you then refined your definition of general complexity. You proposed it as the universe's ability to produce events that cannot, even in theory, be captured by calculable models.
Trying to capture that beyond calculation aspect.
But as we've been saying, randomness still throws a wrench in the works of that definition, doesn't it?
It does. Because if the universe has truly fundamental random processes baked into it, say at the quantum level,
Then those random events fit the definition.
by definition, yeah, no deterministic, calculable model can predict the outcomes of those individual events with certainty. So under this refined definition, randomness itself would qualify as a prime example of general complexity.
Which might not be what we intuitively grasp when we think of something as truly complex, like life or consciousness.
Right, it feels different.
So you then had this clever maneuver you suggested. Could we argue that the universe must be more than just a random number generator? Otherwise, even our current, surprisingly successful physics theories wouldn't work.
That's a very astute philosophical move, I think. The fact that we have been able to develop scientific theories, Newton's laws, relativity, quantum mechanics that so accurately describe and predict so many aspects of the universe.
They work incredibly well.
It strongly suggests that there's an underlying order and structure at play. If everything were purely random at every scale, there would be no stable patterns, no reproducible phenomena for physics to even begin to explain. It would just be chaos.
No laws to discover.
Pretty much. So by establishing that the universe clearly exhibits non-random structure, we can perhaps subtly refine our working definition of complexity.
How so?
We can maybe focus it on the incomputability that might arise from this organized, non-random foundation, rather than just from the unpredictable nature of pure chance itself.
Sort of like saying, we're interested in the structured kind of incalculable.
Exactly. It's a way of saying, yes, randomness is incomputable in a certain sense, but my primary interest, the general complexity I'm after, lies in the potential for incomputability to emerge from the universe's inherent organization and structure.
But then the counter-argument immediately pops up. Couldn't someone simply say that your definition of complexity events not capturable by calculable models could still be perfectly satisfied by having a set of calculable deterministic laws running the show?
It's like Schrodinger's equation.
With just a sprinkle of fundamental randomness thrown in for good measure, say, during quantum measurement.
Yes, that's a very valid point, and indeed a very common viewpoint in modern physics. The Standard Model, for instance, essentially does that.
It mixes deterministic evolution with probabilistic outcomes.
It describes the universe as evolving according to deterministic equations, but it also incorporates fundamental probabilistic processes. So, someone could certainly argue that this combination, deterministic laws plus fundamental randomness, is sufficient to account for anything that isn't perfectly calculable by a purely deterministic model.
So to push back against that, to argue for your kind of general complexity, we need to propose that there's a source of incomputability in the universe that isn't simply this fundamental randomness.
Precisely. You would need to build a case for incomputability stemming from the structured, non-random aspects of the universe in a way that is fundamentally different from the probabilistic outcomes of inherently random events, maybe something emergent or deeper.
This feels like we're venturing into the realm of, well, deep philosophical speculation more than ironclad proof.
We definitely are.
Is there even a fundamental philosophical problem with trying to combine a deterministic framework with the idea of inherent randomness? Do they clash?
Oh, absolutely. A
Yeah.
marriage of determinism and randomness in our physical descriptions, especially in how we interpret quantum mechanics, is a hotbed of philosophical debate. Big time.
Like what?
Well, questions about what probability really means at a fundamental level, is it just about our ignorance, our lack of knowledge,
Yeah.
epistemic, or is it a true feature of reality itself, ontological?
Does the universe actually roll dice?
That's the question. Then there's the infamous measurement problem in quantum mechanics. How does a system go from being in multiple states at once to having a single outcome when measured? Does consciousness cause collapse? Is it random? Are there many worlds? And just the general coherence of having these two seemingly opposed principles, strict rules and pure chance existing side by side, it raises deep questions.
Okay. One way some try to sidestep the issue of fundamental randomness is by looking at deterministic interpretations of quantum mechanics, like Bohmian mechanics.
David Bohm's approach, yes.
Can that perspective give us any leverage in arguing against randomness as a fundamental ingredient of the universe?
Yes, potentially. Bohmian mechanics paints a completely deterministic picture of the quantum world. It's quite different from the standard view.
How does it work?
It proposes that particles, like electrons, always have definite positions, even when we're not looking, and their movement is guided by a kind of pilot wave, the quantum wave function, that evolves according to deterministic equations, specifically the Schrödinger equation.
So no inherent fuzziness.
Not in the particle's position itself. The apparent randomness we observe in experiments, like where a particle hits a screen, is then explained as arising purely from our lack of precise knowledge about the initial positions of all the particles in the system.
So it's epistemic randomness again. Our ignorance.
Exactly. Think of it like, I don't know, a dust mote dancing in a sunbeam. We see it move seemingly randomly, but it's actually following a complex, deterministic path dictated by air currents we can't fully see or predict. Bohm says quantum randomness is like that deterministic underneath, but looks random because we can't know the starting point perfectly.
So if we adopt a Bohmian viewpoint, the type of incomputability we might be looking for, your general complexity, it shifts away from fundamental probabilistic outcome
Right, because there aren't any in that picture.
and towards maybe the sheer incalculability of tracking the precise trajectories of all those hidden particles, or maybe fundamental limits on our ability to ever know those initial conditions with infinite precision.
Exactly. It shifts the focus. The source of things being impossible even in principle to calculate moves away from inherent chance and towards potential deterministic complexity. Maybe the guiding wave equation is non-computable in some cases, or perhaps there are fundamental limitations on our access to information about the underlying state, the particle positions.
The underlying desire here, I think, the intuition you're exploring, is to find a reason to believe in some form of impossibility, even in principle,
A fundamental limit.
that would allow us to argue against randomness being a fundamental aspect of reality itself, to say, no, it's not just random.
To construct a solid case against the existence of fundamental ontological randomness, you would essentially need to argue that all the unpredictability we observe can ultimately be traced back to deterministic processes.
Processes that might themselves be fundamentally incomputable, maybe?
Yes, or processes where the information about the underlying state is fundamentally inaccessible to us, perhaps due to something like the interconnectedness argument we discussed earlier, or maybe even Gödel-like limitations within the deterministic laws themselves.
Okay, but someone might argue, going back to the standard view, that a state transition in the universe, say from state A to state B,
A quantum jump, perhaps.
yeah, it could simply involve applying a probabilistic function, p, where b is just one of several possible outcomes, and each outcome has a certain probability determined by p acting on a. That sounds like randomness being built right into the rules of the game.
That is indeed the standard way that randomness is introduced in many of our most successful physical theories, particularly quantum mechanics. The probabilistic function p, often related to the Born rule,
Right.
it isn't typically seen as just a convenient way of describing our ignorance.
Hmm.
It is considered by many physicists to be the fundamental rule governing the likelihood of different outcomes at the quantum level.
So it's ontological probability for them.
For many, yes. So, to argue against this, as you want to, you would need to provide a compelling reason why this probabilistic description is not fundamental. You'd need to point towards a deeper, perhaps hidden, deterministic layer of reality that underlies it, like in Bohm's theory, or some other alternative.
What about using something like David Lewis's counterfactual theory? The possible world stuff. Can that help us get a better handle on the nature of possibility and maybe build an argument for a deterministic universe, one where there are no truly branching possibilities for randomness to choose from?
Lewis's theory is a fascinating framework for thinking about possibility and necessity, and counterfactual statements like, what would have happened if things had been different?
Yeah, those tricky what ifs.
He bases it on the idea of possible worlds, countless alternative realities that are similar to our own in different degrees. Now, Lewis's theory itself doesn't eliminate randomness or prove determinism,
Oh, no, good.
but it provides a really clear language, a conceptual toolkit for defining precisely what a deterministic universe would look like versus an indeterministic one. In Lewis's terms, a deterministic universe is one where, given the state at any time and the laws, only one possible future sequence of events can unfold across all accessible possible worlds. An indeterministic universe is one where, from a given state, multiple different futures are genuinely possible. The possible worlds literally branch.
Ah, I see. So you could use his framework.
You could potentially use his framework to frame your argument for a deterministic universe by asserting that the apparent branching of possibilities we associate with randomness isn't fundamental. You'd argue that, ultimately, there is only one true path of events unfolding across all the truly accessible possible worlds consistent with the actual laws. The other apparent branches are just epistemic possibilities, things that look possible to us due to ignorance.
It still feels like probabilities might just be a shorthand for us, though. A way to describe situations where we haven't yet figured out the underlying deterministic transition function. Like they're a placeholder for a mechanism we don't yet understand.
That perspective aligns perfectly with the deterministic worldview, as we were saying. If you fundamentally believe the universe operates according to deterministic laws, then probabilities are often seen exactly like that, as reflecting the limits of our knowledge.
Our inability to know the initial conditions precisely or the full complexity of the deterministic rules at play.
Exactly. This is in direct contrast to the view that probabilities are intrinsic, fundamental, ontological aspects of reality itself, dictating how things must behave at the most basic level.
So in that sense, could a claim about the existence of fundamental probability in the physical world be considered a metaphysical claim? A claim about the very nature of reality?
Oh, absolutely. It's deeply metaphysical. The interpretation of probability in physics, whether it's epistemic about our knowledge or ontological about reality itself, have profound metaphysical implications.
What kind of implications?
Well, it touches upon determinism versus indeterminism, the nature of causality, the reality of possibility, and our overall picture of how the world works at its most fundamental level. It's not just physics, it's philosophy of physics.
I came across some of Nancy Cartwright's ideas, where she argues that claims about causes and claims about probabilities don't always line up neatly. She talks about a dappled world.
That's right. Cartwright has a really interesting perspective. She emphasizes that causality is about real physical capacities and powers that things have, properties that exist out there in the world.
Like the capacity of aspirin to relieve a headache.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And she argues that probabilities are just one way these underlying causal capacities manifest themselves, often in the messy reality of complex and varied situations where lots of things are happening at once.
So the cause is more fundamental than the probability.
In her view, yes. She argues that a cause, like aspirin, can have a genuine capacity to produce a certain effect, like pain relief, even if, in many specific circumstances, that effect doesn't occur with a high probability. Maybe because of other interacting factors, counteracting causes, or just the specific setup. This viewpoint suggests that the underlying causal structure of the universe, these capacities, might be more fundamental than just the surface-level probabilities we observe. She also talks about laws being ceteris paribus, holding only other things being equal, which often they aren't.
Okay. And interestingly, both Leonard Susskind and Stephen Wolfram have separately suggested that entropy, which we often associate with randomness and disorder, can actually be seen as a form of hidden or encrypted information.
Right, complexity hidden from view.
And neither of their perspectives necessarily requires fundamental randomness as the underlying cause, right?
That's a really crucial insight, I think. These viewpoints, coming from physics and computation, demonstrate how what appears to be random or highly disordered high entropy can in fact arise from underlying deterministic systems, usually combined with our limited ability to access and process all the information about those systems. Think about the molecules in a gas sleigh. Their precise deterministic motion is incredibly complex, but we perceive it as random heat and pressure. So it strongly supports the idea that apparent randomness on the surface doesn't automatically equate to a fundamental, irreducible chance at the deepest level.
It gives me this gut feeling, and maybe this is just intuition, but just saying randomness did it feels a bit like saying God did it. It feels like an explanation that stops further inquiry rather than truly explaining anything, like giving up on finding a mechanism.
I understand that feeling. It can feel like randomness is invoked as an explanatory primitive, a place where explanation just stops.
Yeah.
Why did this atom decay now and not later? Well, it was random.
Yeah. But is
Yeah.
there any formal logical way to actually argue against randomness being a real fundamental property of the universe? Can you prove it isn't real?
Look, while a direct, universally accepted formal proof that definitively rules out ontological randomness is likely impossible, partly because we can only observe outcomes, not the mechanism itself. You can construct arguments within deterministic frameworks.
Okay.
You can aim to show how what we perceive as randomness could emerge naturally and perhaps inevitably from non-random deterministic principles operating at a deeper level. Bohmian mechanics is one attempt. Chaotic dynamics is another source of apparent randomness from determinism. Information theoretic arguments like Suskind's or Wolfram's offer another angle.
So you argue for determinism and show how it can produce apparent randomness.
That's generally the strategy, yes.
Yeah.
You build a plausible deterministic model and demonstrate its consistency with observed probabilistic phenomena.
This whole conversation makes me think about Platonic forms, this ancient idea that abstract concepts like mathematical truths or perfect shapes exist eternally in some realm beyond our physical senses.
Plato's theory of forms, yeah. A cornerstone in Western philosophy.
Could something like the concept of a parity bit, that simple check for even or odd numbers of ones, could that be considered one of these forms? Always existing, independent of us, just waiting for us to discover its logic.
That's a very classic articulation of the Platonic perspective. In this view, concepts like mathematical theorems, logical structures, maybe even fundamental constants, they have a real independent existence in an abstract realm.
Untouched by the physical world or human thought.
Right. The idea of a parity bit, with its inherent logical structure and mathematical properties, could certainly be interpreted as such a form within that Platonic framework.
And if so, could there be an infinite landscape of infinitely complex Platonic forms just waiting to be unveiled? Mathematical structures we haven't even conceived of?
Well, from a Platonic standpoint, yes. The realm of forms, particularly in mathematics and logic, is often considered to be infinitely vast and complex. It's seen as containing an endless array of structures, relationships, and truths that are, in a sense, out there, waiting to be discovered or apprehended by minds capable of grasping them. Gödel himself was something of a Platonist.
So my idea then, defining general complexity as something that fundamentally isn't calculable, that feels like it leaves room for the universe to possess a deeper kind of complexity.
Beyond just mechanical rules.
Right, maybe including concepts like strong emergence, where genuinely new properties arise that can't be simply predicted from the underlying parts, even in principle. Or maybe even the manifestation of this Platonic incomputability, these incredibly complex abstract structures, somehow influencing or shaping the physical world.
That's a fascinating synthesis.
Because the alternative, that complexity arises solely from calculable rules, seems to always lead us back to the possibility of isolated systems, which might not exist, or that easy fallback explanation, randomness, which, as we've discussed, feels so difficult to truly argue against definitively, even if it feels unsatisfying.
So you're setting up a dichotomy. Either complexity is fundamentally incalculable, maybe tied to structure, emergence, or even Platonic ideals, or it's just calculable rules plus maybe some randomness.
Kind of, and I'm leaning towards the first. That's a very coherent, and well-reasoned way to articulate your philosophical stance. You're essentially proposing a definition of complexity that embraces the possibility of fundamental limitations to what can be computed or predicted.
Limitations that might arise not from chance, but from the very structured, non-random nature of reality itself, potentially tapping into these deeper levels.
Exactly. And the calculable models that we develop in physics, which are incredibly valuable and powerful tools, don't get me
Of
wrong.
course, indispensable.
They would then be seen as representing an incomplete subset of this much broader concept of general complexity. They capture part of the picture, maybe a very large part, but not the whole thing.
A necessary but not sufficient description.
Yeah. So my working hypothesis, the idea I'm exploring based on all this, is this. No calculable model, no matter how powerful, can ever fully capture the entirety of the universe. And this inherent structured incalculability. This is what I mean by general complexity.
It's a bold claim.
I know it's a bold claim, but it's a fascinating idea to keep wrestling with, I think.
It is a bold claim, but as our discussion has highlighted, there are indeed many compelling philosophical arguments and even some intriguing scientific hints from things like chaos theory, quantum interpretations, and information theory that suggest it's a possibility worth serious consideration. It's not just wishful thinking.
Well, this has been a truly deep dive into some incredibly intricate ideas. Wow. It really forces you to confront the potential fundamental limits of what we can know and maybe what we can even understand.
It pushes right up against the boundaries.
So, what does this all mean? Where does it leave us? Perhaps it means that the universe harbors secrets that aren't just incredibly difficult to uncover, hiding in the complexity, but are fundamentally beyond the reach of even the most sophisticated calculations we could ever conceive.
A reality beyond algorithms.
Exactly, hinting at a reality that is far richer, maybe more structured, maybe even more profoundly mysterious than our current models can possibly encompass. Something to keep thinking about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.